folks. We're going to move into our next session, which is on, it's a really interesting topic. We were really excited to get this talk submitted for the conference from Siobhan Dolan, who's a solutions architect at LexisNexis Risk Solutions. And our topic is authentication for internet gaming, or also innovative authentication for online gambling. So take it away, Siobhan.
Thank you so much. Hi. Thank you for joining me for my very first talk. I would like to ask for some help. I am very nervous. This is my first talk ever. So thanks. What I need help with is just making sure that I don't lock my knees. And so if I haven't moved in a minute, can you just like flash me up a sign of some kind to just like, yeah, thanks. Just keep me moving. Thank you. Yes, so as Megan said, I'm going to be talking about what we're doing in the gaming space in terms of authentication, because there are some new regulatory rules that have come down in the last year. So we'll just go ahead and get into it. For anybody that hasn't seen my name before, it is difficult. I did not choose it. Siobhan, but you don't have to pay any attention to how it's spelled. All right, so let me give you a brief kind of introduction to what the state of online gambling is, specifically within the state of New Jersey. The United States has a completely different mindset when it comes to online gaming from the likes of Australia and EMEA and APAC. The states are responsible for kind of regulating themselves. There isn't any federal oversight when it comes to actual gameplay, and so things get a little bit complicated. New Jersey is a special case because back in 2013, and I'll get into more timeline stuff here in a second, they were much more open to expanding their portfolio, their state's portfolio for online gaming, and so they made a couple of legislative moves to allow more for it. What that means, though, is that the state of New Jersey has a ton of money that they are taking in through their wagering. The largest bar graph there is just for the month of August. Yellow is 2021, gray is 2020. So we're almost at $500 million in a single month for one state. And so I did a little bit of envelope math, and I think if we kind of extrapolate that out, assuming similar uptake from consumers throughout all states, and of course New Jersey has a relatively small population when compared to New York, Florida, Texas, California, we can see that this is like approaching $1 trillion. So this industry, which is relatively new within the United States, is huge and rife for destruction. There's a ton of risk, and a lot of it is economic. There are a ton of reputational risks with online gambling, et cetera, et cetera. So I just wanted to paint a picture of kind of what is at stake today. My line graph there is a piece of data from Statista, and it's 19 years of reported stolen identities. And so keyword there is reported, right? Because when you're talking about any kind of crime, the number of reported crimes is often far scaled down from the actual incidence of the crime happening. And so if we can just imagine how many identities may have been stolen even since 2019, it's billions of records. Not all of those records are complete identities. There may be a phone number or an email address, or maybe a name and a home address, or maybe a combination of those things. Emails, obviously. So the number of records in a data breach doesn't necessarily correlate to the number of identities stolen, but there is a relationship there. All right, so I said that back in 2013, New Jersey really bit the bullet in terms of, thank you, good looking out. New Jersey really bit the bullet in wanting to gain the value of all of the tax revenue that's coming in through online wagering. And in 2019, they drafted a series of new regulations to fight an identity theft problem that was actively being investigated. It's still being investigated today by the New Jersey State Police. And so they needed to do something else when it came to online account creation for gambling accounts. As kind of a little sidebar, this isn't in my cheat notes, but when you think of a gambling account, it's a little bit like a bank account because you can put money in there, and while it won't accrue interest, it is still an asset. And so you have to go through diligent customer acquisition. You have to have a robust KYC, know your customer program, when you are a gaming operator, much like a banking institution. And in 2020, there was a deadline put in place where by Halloween of last year, operators had to be compliant with new regulations mandating authentication at the point of account creation. And that's what we're going to talk about. So to kind of set my jargon straight, when it comes to identity verification, within gaming for the state of New Jersey, they're talking about name, address, date of birth, social security number. Are those identity attributes real? That's what verification for them means. It means data accuracy. Does that data exist? Do we know of it before today? And luckily, LexisNexis Risk Solutions has a couple of things that help with that identification and verification. So the next layer that the New Jersey Division of Gaming Enforcement, and for saving oxygen, I'm just going to say DGE. Hopefully I'm enunciating enough. So the DGE says that data accuracy needs to be the verification of the SSN, date of birth, name, and physical address, and there are stipulations around, okay, well, how do you define a name, and what's an address? We can't do PO boxes, so there's nuance there, but just say I live out in the middle of the burbs in California, which I do. I only have one mailing address, and so, my identity is relatively simple when it comes to the books of the DGE. But with authentication, we need to ensure that it's not Eric using Siobhan's identity to sign up for a wagering account to potentially launder money. And so we need to add on that extra bit of authentication, and there are a couple of options available to the casinos through this new regulation. So they're not forcing all of the operators to go down a solo path of authentication. There are a couple of options that the operators can take. And the operators are Golden Nugget, Resorts, Borgata, any license holder for gambling within the state of New Jersey. Yes. Obviously, I think most of us know that there are problems with identity. The first one, my handy little line graph there with the hockey stick at the end, theft. Identity theft has been building since the early 2010s, potentially earlier. My research led me down several rabbit holes, and one rabbit hole I found myself in was the year 2016. 2016 is represented there in the middle. I know it's illegible from a distance, but it's really just illustrative. Look at how many data breaches happened in 2016 alone. There were billions of records exposed, and again, record doesn't necessarily equate to identity, but still there is risk to that identity if a piece of that identity is breached. That's just 2016. And so we are 5 years later, we are now dealing, April, Facebook had a breach. So just compound the number of data breaches that have happened since 2016, and you can kind of start shaking in your boots about how bad this problem really is and how compromised most of us are. Heard some alarming statistic probably on one of my podcasts that said every single US adult has a compromised identity. So hopefully that's not true, but have I been pwned argues otherwise. If you look up any email address that you have had, more than likely it has been exposed in a breach. Mine definitely has. Mine is on there from several different sites, not Ashley Madison though, thank goodness. All right, boom, 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 boom. I have a lot more stats in there, but we'll just keep moving right along. So some of you may know this cartoon from back in the day where on the internet nobody knows you're a dog. Today we at least can tell that there is a dog and not a bot on the other side of a keyboard. And so that's a good step in the right direction. The reason for the DGE filing this new regulation was really to protect consumers because they were getting all of these reports of identity theft. The stat that I had was at a national level, but I was speaking with some of the state troopers from New Jersey, and the caseload just for the crime of identity theft is untenable for them to investigate. So it's a huge problem, and it filters up to the IRS because obviously gaming winnings and losses are taxable, deductions, line items, things that you have to report on your taxes. And so Eric may have stolen my identity, but I'll get the tax bill. Thanks, guy. I didn't ask for that. And so how do we, what do we do? What do we do? So there are alternatives when it comes to familiar enough options for gaming operators, and they are mainly physical knowledge attestations. So you've got your document upload. That's going to be taking a picture of your government-issued ID, passport, driver's license usually, and you can do that through the browser, or you can do that through an app, or you can go the full non-digital route and go into a casino and perform your identity authentication in person. This is, of course, not possible when we are in the middle of a pandemic, and of course, the casinos want to have a broader reach of those people not necessarily able to come into the casino for one reason or another. They want those users, they want that user acquisition in a non-digital fashion. And so there are many challenges to those alternatives. Key number one is the consumer experience. You don't necessarily want to repeat answers to questions that you may have set up. Those questions should not be publicly searchable. I should not be able to go on to a person's Facebook and find out what color their 2018 Chevy Silverado is. And mother's maiden name is, of course, a joke, a cruel joke. And so how can we passively, with as little consumer friction as possible, gain a sufficient level of trust that a consumer is who they say they are at the point of creating their account? So we came up with this model of layered verification that all has to happen together. And so in the experience of creating an account for an operator, a consumer is already anticipating having to give their identity details. We're already anticipating the need to verify our name, date of birth, SSN, and address. And since the casino also collects phone numbers for the purposes of marketing, but also data account management, player account management, proactive outreach and notifications, we can run a verification that that phone number actually belongs to that individual. And that's through a set of data sources. Some are publicly available, some are not, but we can come to a strong conclusion that the phone number is actually owned and possessed by the identity that was also verified at the point of new account. And the middle section there is a device-based identification. Device for us is going to be a smartphone or a computer, whether it's a desktop or a laptop or any kind of internet-enabled device. It could be, a gaming console. And as long as that device hasn't been seen with another identity, because in practice we have seen like 1,660, 48 different identities associated with a solo device. That is an enormous red flag. You should not be allowing the creation and instantiation of those gaming accounts when there is a clearly suspicious device making the connection to your service. And so if we have the identity check, we have the phone check, and we have this device check, all three need to clear in order for that player to become a player, in order for that consumer to transition to a player and be able to deposit money into their account. Asterisk, there are also a bunch of other fraud checks and continuous checks that go along with this. So it's not just a pass it one time, you're done, you're good. But this is the start where you don't have to ask your player to upload a license or go into a casino to validate in person or answer a series of questions that may or may not be well designed. If there's a misconfiguration in my KBA API, potentially the questions that I have access to or the answers to the questions that I have access to don't have any relevance to my real identity. And then as a consumer, what am I left to do? I'm stuck. So we've been able to successfully prove this in the wild. We've had a frictionless experience. This is just for one of my operators, and this I think is, 45 days worth of data. We were able to allow the creation of 39% of their total user population, where that user didn't have to go through an extra step of validation to begin gameplay. So that was a frictionless user adoption. And that's really the crux of it. We have a layer of friction after. If a consumer fails at phone or identity or device, well, not necessarily identity. If the consumer fails at phone or device, we can then ask them for a knowledge-based authentication because we didn't get that 3 perfect hit. So with an added layer of KBA, there was an additional uptick of 17% additional consumers that had to pass through a KBA to get an account. But those didn't have to upload a license. There's some figures that might be cut off there at the bottom where we also, somebody failed the KBA and they had to go to document upload. But at the beginning of this story, you have consumers that didn't have to do anything extra to start gameplay. We were able to seamlessly and really without the player even being conscious of these authentications that we were doing, we were able to get them into their system and get them entertained within a matter of minutes. And this is using technology that's available today. And this, this isn't really anything net new that's been built. These are all systems that have been used. They're just used in concert and orchestration now in a way that they haven't been leveraged before for the purposes of account creation. I have some stuff on the appendix. This is just some cool stuff that these are my rabbit holes that I went down. So if you guys would like to snap a photo, that would be cool if you dig the same nerdy stuff I like to. But thank you. That wasn't that bad.
Hello? I'll just use this one. Well, thank you. It was great. You did an amazing job.
Thank you.
First talk, wonderful job. Does anyone in the audience have any questions? Andrew?
So first of all, yeah, that was a great talk.
Thank you.
I'm curious, how does like proximity and borders factor into everything you're doing? So I know, like for example, I forget where I was, like New York or something. Like as soon as I crossed over into New Jersey, I started getting these ads for wagering sites.
Yep.
How does that impact your approach to verification and authentication?
Yeah, so the location goes into the device verification bit. Part of the device assessment is location intelligence, and that has a series of layers. Some are available through embedded SDK, and others are garnered through the browser. It doesn't necessarily go into, well, we can check the proximity of the user that is signing up for the account to the address that they provide at account sign up, and we can measure the distance between those 2 points. And so if there's a vast difference, then that will be a signal that that device should not be trusted, and that user should go through an extra step of friction before their account is created. Did I answer your question? Please let me escape. Thank you so much. Thank you.